So our guest today needs no introduction. I'm speaking with Uber CEO Dara Khosrowshahi. Uber just made the big announcement recently that they'll be rolling out upfront fares for drivers to most cities in the country over the next couple months. So drivers will now be able to see the destination, how much they're going to earn on each and every single trip before they accept a ride, which is something drivers have been asking for a long time. So we're going to talk about that. Uber's also rolling out features like Trip Radar and a new cash award for Uber Pro program and a few other things which we'll detail in a blog post and leave a link to in the description or the show notes. So in today's interview with Dara, we'll talk about the main part of this announcement, which is obviously the upfront fares for drivers and really why it took so long to come about, why Uber is rolling this out now, and also why are there sometimes strings attached to popular driver programs like this in the form of either acceptance rate requirements or even limits on destination filters. So we'll spend a bit of time on driver earnings. We know this is important to drivers, why Dara said drivers are earning $39 per active hour a couple months ago, and what exactly is an active hour, right? Dara also says that earnings have dropped 25% since then, so we'll talk about that. And of course, what Uber is doing when it comes to rising gas prices and other expenses due to inflation, right? Drivers obviously have the gross income and then the expenses to consider since they are responsible for that. So we'll ask Dara about that. And also, I really wanted to ask Dara, what's a fair commission for Uber to charge, since this is a big complaint, just how much Uber takes from every single ride. And Dara says, we'll hear why Dara says Uber's commission should be 20%. And then finally, we'll also touch on driver safety. Uber requires drivers to go through a lot of hoops, but passengers, not so much. So we'll talk about all that and more in today's interview with Dara Khosrowshahi. Really appreciate everyone who sent in questions and comments in preparation for this interview, and I'd love to hear from you. Either leave a comment below or send me an email, harry@therideshareguy.com. Let me know what you thought of this interview. Wanted to give you that quick overview of what we're going to discuss, and just so you know, there weren't any topics that were off limit in this interview. The only thing that I couldn't ask Dara about was anything related to basically because they're in a financial quiet period, so anything related to like basically the company's overall health or profitability or future forecasting, which I don't think was an issue at all during this interview, as you will see or hear. All right, let's hit the road and see what Dara has to say.
Welcome to the Rideshare Guy podcast, where you will learn about the rideshare and mobility industry straight from Harry Campbell, who's got over 5 years experience covering the industry and has talked to thousands of drivers. There's no better place to stay up to date, entertained, and educated. So let's dive in.
All right, Dara, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. How about you?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to have you back on the podcast and the YouTube channel. It's been a few years, but I see you're in the same office with a new chair.
Exactly. Some things don't change, but the chair is much more comfortable.
Very cool. Well, it does look comfy, and I'm excited to dig in because Uber just announced a slew of updates, improvements to the driver experience. So definitely excited to dig into that with you today. And, I think one of the things that Uber just announced, they're rolling up this upfront pricing and Trip Radar in a number of new markets. So drivers will now be able to see all the information about a trip when they get a request come in. And I have to say, this is good timing because one of the top requests that my audience wanted me to ask you about was this very feature. So I'd love to hear your thoughts and have you dig in there.
Yeah, absolutely. So this was, listen, I think if you're listening to drivers, you know that this is one of the top pain points of being a driver. And I think we have started to listen to drivers. And I think in the past, it's like guilty as charged. I don't think we were as connected deeply with our drivers and taking the kind of feedback that we want to in order to keep building a product that's like, not just as flexible as you want it to be with good earnings, et cetera, but just the product that they're asking for. And so we have this group like Uber Crew, who they're drivers, they listen to their community, et cetera. And this was the top pain point in terms of the driver's experience, which is they don't know the destination up front. There's some guessing, and often they don't know the fare up front. And are getting that information to them. Listen, it's in our interest. It took a bunch of deep engineering work. It's not easy to do necessarily, but it improves the driver experience. And it also reduces cancellation on the side of riders as well. So ultimately, it was the right thing to do. It's a win-win. It took a bunch of work in the back end, but we've rolled it out in a number of cities, and we've been really happy with the results. And we're going to roll it out. We're going to continue the rollout, and it is the number one feature that I'm personally super excited for.
Very cool. Yeah, no, and I think I appreciate that Uber is doing more in terms of Uber Crew and listening to drivers. I know you yourself, we've interviewed Uber executives in the past. They've talked about their own experience and your experience driving and delivering. So I think that's very cool to see. I mean, I will say, right, these are things that these features. I think I remember writing an article maybe 6, 7 years ago saying, "Wow, it's crazy that you don't know where the rider's going," and the rider doesn't know that either, right? So I think that this
It's about
feature.
time, right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, I think probably, I think drivers are definitely happy to see it. Some impression might be, what took so long? Do you think that it's kind of, I think you sort of mentioned, right, that it wasn't a big focus of the company before. Do you think it just wasn't that important before and now it is, or it wasn't as feasible? Like, why now? Why do you think now is the important time? Why does this matter so much to Uber? And it matters to drivers.
Yeah, so I think why now is one is we are really focused on drivers' needs. I mean, I think the most important factor in terms of Uber's growth is the number of drivers that we have on the platform, their satisfaction,
Mhm.
driver retention is continuing to improve. It's like we want drivers on the platform, we want them to be happy, we want them to be satisfied with their earnings, and we want them to continue to grow with us. So it's good for business for us to
Yeah,
introduce features that drivers want.
definitely.
Now, what was keeping us to some extent from doing it was the way that we priced fares and
Hmm.
the fact that fares in the past were based on simple time and distance,
Yeah,
right? And that was kind of an accepted practice. And by the way, it was a very understandable way for us to say, this is what you're going to get paid for said trip. But what fixed time and distance failed to take into account is, well, how far is a pickup? How
hmm,
long are you going to drive to pick up that passenger? And then where the destination is,
yeah,
because you could have two trips that are equal time and distance, but if one destination has a much lower chance of your being able to come back or go to wherever you
yeah,
want to go with another ride, then that trip is worth much less than, let's say the drop off is in the middle of the city. You're going to instantly get another ride as well. And in that case, like our interests are totally aligned with
yeah.
the driver, which is, we want you giving rides to
Yeah.
people and earning money because that's how we earn money as well. But this construct of time and distance being the determining factor then
Hmm.
essentially cause us to misprice trips. And so
Got
if
it.
essentially you're structurally mispricing trips in terms of the true value of that trip, then you become limited in the amount of information that you can give drivers as to the nature of that trip. So once we said, hey, let's break apart time and distance, let's price in a true way,
Hmm.
then we could give you upfront pricing and destination as well. That's the breakthrough ultimately for us.
Got it. Well, and I mean, let's talk about time and distance for a while, because I think the per mile and really the per mile rate, I think has always been something that drivers look to when they think about their pay. It says, hey, here's how much I'm paid, right? If you ask a lot of drivers, they'll say, oh, the per mile rate has not increased, or it's in some cases it's gone down, over the past 3, 4, 5 years. So I'm curious to know how you think about, how drivers are thinking about pay, right? And sort of how Uber is, right? Because I think a lot of drivers, I had a driver message me and said, rates, my per mile rate hasn't gone up, and it's, if anything, it's gone down over the past 7 years. So, I think a lot of drivers track it. And so I'm curious, what you think about how drivers think about their pay, like that per mile aspect.
I think the per mile aspect of it is a really useful shortcut for you
Hmm.
to understand why you're getting paid X or Y. So
Hmm.
I think like there's strength in that, there's comfort in that, there's understandability in that, and that's important. But at the same time, it misprices trips. So
Hmm.
like if you ask us what took us so long, et cetera, that was the issue, which is we knew that drivers really like time and distance because it's clear, you can calculate on your own, et cetera. But ultimately, I think the system that we're introducing now, which is absolutely, listen, we're going to take into account how far you drive because, that's gasoline prices, et cetera. We're going to
Yeah.
take into account how long it takes, et cetera. But there are other factors. And ultimately, what we're hoping to get to is a world where earnings continue to be healthy and if anything improve, and you're getting more information. So you're making, kind of the information flow is even versus where it was before, which was uneven, where we knew where the destination was,
Yeah.
but you didn't.
Well, no, and I think definitely overall, I think a lot of drivers have reacted positively. We just did sort of a 20-week update from one of our contributors in Minneapolis talking about his experience, with this upfront. And, he was a big fan and, talked about some of those long trips. And, he calculates, by the mile, right? How much is he going to make? And so I think a lot of drivers have a lot more of that choice and flexibility with the system. So I'm curious, is there any, sort of providing this information, I think sometimes it comes with strings attached, right? In California, for example, you have to accept 5 of your last 10 trips in order to see this information. In these other cities, it doesn't have that requirement. Another really popular driver feature, destination filter, you only get 2 per day. And at certain times of busy traffic or things like that, you actually can't use it at all in some cities. So I think one thing that drivers love about, we talked about what they love, but what they don't like are the strings attached. So I'm curious, why are those strings attached why are they in place? And then is there anything Uber can potentially do to mitigate that in the future?
So I'm hoping and I'm hoping that we can remove some of those strings. So
Mhm.
for example, the string attached of you get to see destination, assuming that you accept a certain percentage of your trips. If we're doing a really good job pricing, and essentially like we price the trip right,
Right.
your acceptance rates will naturally be at a high rate.
Mhm.
And by the way, if it's not, we're getting pricing wrong. That's our
Yeah.
fault. It's not your fault. So I'm hoping that the new construct allows us to take some of those kind of conditions off. That's the
Mhm.
ultimate. So again, the information balance is there,
Yeah.
and we're making decisions based on the attractiveness of that ride,
Yeah.
matching the price that you're going to get paid.
Got it.
That's ultimately where we want to go. We're not going to be like this. This is going to take some experimentation. There's some
Yeah.
deep tech that goes into it, and there's some optimization, because actually the signal that we want from you, Harry, is like,
Mhm.
if you're not accepting a trip, then we're underpricing it. Then we got
Yeah.
to correct. Then the algos have to understand it,
Yeah.
price it better the next time, et cetera. So
I,
there's a path to get there, and
definitely.
I'd ask for a little bit of patience and trust. That is the goal. Our goals are aligning.
For sure. No, I think that's definitely a fair point. And I think it's one thing that drivers have always complained about, and Uber is doing a better job in the past. You didn't have the opportunity to opt out of Uber Pool, for example, with Uber Share that's come back online now. It's sort of like if you want to do these trips, and there are times where you want to do short trips or you want to do a bunch of short trips in order to get a Quest bonus, for example, where it makes sense. So I think that to me is key, is that as long as Uber isn't, telling people they have to take it, right? Sort of like you said, right? We want to make the trips so attractive that they want to do these. Our contributor in Minnesota has a 45% acceptance rate right now. So I think there's a bit of work to do there. But like you said, right now you have that option as a driver. You see that information. So for me, as many of the strings attached that can be removed going into the future, I may hold you to that in our next interview. We'll see how Uber is doing on some of those.
Yeah, listen, it's a goal, and again, the more strings we have to attach, the worse our pricing tech is. So I'll take that to our pricing folks and push them.
Yeah, very, very cool. And I think the last question I had along this line is, I think one thing for drivers that are independent contractors, this has always come, they really feel that they want this information. They should know that where the trip is going and all that, especially if you're a true independent contractor. I'm curious how much that plays into this decision. And then if there's also, are there additional steps Uber can take to build on this type of feature? Like, do you want to tease any features, that you're building that can even expand on this or, take this to the next level? I mean, I'm sure we can touch on trip radar too, because I think this is in that same family of features.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to talk to. Listen, is this related to independent contractor? Frankly, the answer is no.
Hmm.
It's related to what drivers were telling us. So that
Okay.
this was our goal, was to have a roadmap to get you your destination, and we
I
had
mean, it
to
might
kind
be a
of.
side benefit though, right? Because obviously, if you're an independent contractor, you do have more control over the trips you're taking and the prices you're setting, right? So I think it's kind of one of the things that, maybe detractors have always pointed to, and now Uber is starting to address some of this.
Definitely, but it wasn't the goal. It
Hmm.
could be a great outcome. That's wonderful, and yes, we absolutely agree that drivers are independent contractors, and the more independence we can build into the system, and the more
Yeah.
power we give drivers to have agency, that I think the better for both of us. Trip radar is one of those, actually, it was a second order result
Hmm.
of our doing upfront pricing. We weren't planning to do trip radar, and trip radar came about because we actually saw that our systems generally are matching and pricing based on their the probability of said driver wanting to take this trip, and
Mhm.
you're being optimal match in terms of network efficiency, you're covering the least amount of space to get to the pickup, et cetera. But those are predictions that could be wrong. So the
Mhm.
concept of Trip Radar is not only are we going to match you, let's say the traditional way, but we're going to give you signal as to what other trips are available. And listen, you may be, hey, I want to drive for another hour, so I don't want a long trip. I may not want to go in a particular direction. There are other characteristics of trips that may be
Yeah.
important to you that may not be important to the average driver that we're not taking into account in terms of pricing. So Trip Radar has two benefits. One is more choice for the driver, and you can accept it if you want, and hopefully then you get that match. But again, it gives a signal as to how we should be thinking about these trips, their attractiveness, and how do we price them in the future.
Very cool. Well, I'm big fans of both of these features, and I think the feedback so far has been pretty positive from drivers and sort of like you said, it's something they've been asking for a long time. When we survey thousands of drivers and talk to tens of thousands more, the two things that always come up, as you might know, pay and flexibility. And I think this definitely does a lot to address flexibility. I'm curious though, how do you think these features will impact actual driver earnings? Should they expect to earn same, less, more? Because as this is obviously one of the reasons why we all do it, right?
The design spec around these features is for the driver to get paid the same
Hmm.
and essentially have more information and be able to choose their destinations so that the experience is better for the
Yep.
same amount of income. A particular driver, based on then what they do, what trips are they accepting, what trips are they not accepting, their behavior may
Got it.
wind up making less or the same or more. But
Hmm.
the design is same earnings level, more information, which should drive better satisfaction.
Got it. Well, then let's talk about driver pay for a second, because obviously, as you know, this is an important, if not the most important topic to drivers. So I think the added flexibility, same pay sounds great. But, in a Bloomberg interview you did a couple months ago, you mentioned that drivers were earning $39 an hour during utilized hours, right? Which would be period 2 and 3. So, we posted a clip on YouTube, very popular, but there was also a lot of skepticism about this figure. So I'm curious, what do you think about the state of driver earnings right now? And, what should they expect going forward?
Yeah, so I understand the skepticism, but you should understand, like, we're not going to lie about this stuff.
Hmm.
I think one specific addition to that is this was in top 20 cities in the U.S. So
Okay.
if I didn't say that, I
Bigger
should have
cities.
said that to be specific. So that's one. That was where pay was. Pay now is about $30 an hour, including tips in the U.S. across the U.S. It's come down a little bit as more drivers have
And so
come
this is
onto the
during
road.
utilized hours, sort of that same period two and
Yes,
three.
this is during utilized hours, and utilization is really high, as you don't know what it is, but utilization are
Hmm.
healthy levels. And for us, part of the reason why the per hour number is a bit lower is because there's less surge in the system.
Hmm.
We think that's a good thing, and I think to some extent, ETAs and surge were levels that, from a long-term standpoint, weren't in anyone's interest. I know the
Yeah.
pay per hour was pretty good, but I think ultimately are bringing surge down, are improving ETAs. You're having to drive kind of
Yeah.
lower distances for the pickup, improves experience for everyone. And we hope that we can, and those kinds of earnings levels are still healthy earnings levels
Yeah.
for the kind of flexible work that we're offering.
For sure. Well, and I think the one thing that may be a bit confusing for drivers is frankly like how we talk about earnings, right? That same week that, you were doing the Bloomberg interview, I got a push notification from my Uber driver app that said drivers in LA are averaging $29 an hour. And then I reached out to Uber and confirmed with them that that was actually period 1 through 3. So sort of all your online time, right? So it kind of makes sense, right? If you're at that point 2 months ago, if you're at $39 per hour, you're at about 75% utilization, that would bring you down to $30 an hour. LA is a top 20 market. So I think the numbers actually sort of check out, like you said. But I guess that kind of brings up the larger point. Like, how should we be thinking about driver earnings? Like when we're talking about per hour, like to me, I don't actually think it's that fair to use utilized hours, right? If you go to McDonald's and you have a cashier and they're working and helping you check out, right? They're being paid for that. And then when the cashier leaves, they're all of a sudden not being paid, right? They're still being paid for that time. So to me, the key metric, I think Uber should always be presenting earnings and sort of that full online time. So I'm curious to sort of get your point of view on that, how Uber is thinking about that going forward.
I, I think yours is a fair point of view. Our point of view is we don't know what some drivers do laps. Sometimes, they're waiting for a ping from Uber, or they may be waiting for a ping from some other, whether it's delivery or Lyft, et cetera. So
Okay.
it's hard for us to know factually, whether you're kind of
Hmm.
waiting around and just on Uber, and hopefully that's a case for us, that's in our self-interest, but we don't know that. So that's why, like, based on what we actually know, utilized hours are the metric that I can relate to you factually,
Hmm.
because I don't know what else you're doing.
Got it. I guess it is, yeah, maybe we don't need to belabor this point, but maybe it's important to very, clearly state, right? Like what the earning, if you're sort of talking about earnings per hour, right? Uber is sometimes using periods 1 through 3 and sometimes periods 2 through 3. You could sort of say, well, when earnings are really high, we kind of do period 1 through 3. When they drop that down, we go more to utilize. So I think definitely, I won't bug you too much about that, but your team may get an email or two from me if I keep seeing
I
earnings
like
per
getting
hour.
bugged. I like getting bugged. Like the feedback, we're trying to get better. So I don't mind your bugging me at all.
All right, cool. Well, so we talked about earnings, and I think that, the other big concern for drivers right now, as you brought up, gas and inflation. I think that we see companies across the board raising prices. One of my favorite places for a quick burrito, Chipotle, just raised their prices by 4%. My kids' yogurt used to cost $4, and now it costs 6.5 for four or five little yogurt drinks. So I think drivers are seeing this, not only in their personal expenses, but also gas and inflation. So Uber added the temporary fuel surcharge, and I think that has definitely helped to offset some of the fuel. But what about all the other expenses a driver has? We talked about the gross income really of a driver, right? Those numbers that we talked about before, but drivers are responsible for gas and really all of their expenses. So I'm curious, what you think about those going forward, because those are obviously,
Yeah,
up.
totally. I mean, the gas prices are, I think, a thorn in everyone's side. Thank God they're
Hmm.
coming down a little bit, but they're coming down a little bit. They're not
Yeah,
where
they've
we
been
want
down
them.
a little bit over the past month or so.
Yeah, but believe me, no one's happy about it, including us. So on that basis, we really focused on the Uber Pro refresh of the
Okay.
Uber Pro program. And there, one, we focused on earnings, which is there's going to be kind of a cash reward for being a Diamond member, which we'll talk more about when we're ready.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, you
but
guys
then
really
as it
tease that one. A lot of drivers want to know details, so I'm sure once it's ready, we'll be able to
yeah,
talk about that
it'll be ready, and just to be upfront, it's going to differ based on cities, et cetera.
for
But
sure.
we'll definitely let you know. We wouldn't tease it unless we thought that drivers would be happy with it. But on the expense side, it does include discounts on gas, and
Okay.
depending on kind of your level, it'll be 2 to 6% discounts on gas. It'll be 6% for Pro, which is, we think, really attractive. Up to 7% with certain retailers, and based on kind of certain circumstances.
Right.
So we're really working hard to get you those kinds of discounts. Chipotle is awesome, but if you want to buy at 7-Eleven,
Yeah.
we have discounts at 7-Eleven as
So
well.
the 2 to 6% is through the debit card, right?
Correct. Thank you for
Gotcha.
that.
Well,
That
because I
correct.
think it's actually, I'm a big fan of a lot of these services. One of the, we've covered Upside before. I know they're a big partner of Uber's and a lot of folks like that. But also, people have their own gas stations that they like to use or their own rewards program. So I think anytime you can kind of combine those debit card rewards with your own rewards program or with a Get Upside, right? That's when it starts to be really valuable for drivers. So I just kind of wanted to highlight, and we'll share more information for drivers about that debit card, because I do think, that's sort of on top of what they can get.
Exactly right. And the other cool thing about the debit card is that it's instant pay, no fee. So
Hmm.
the minute you earn, it's
Yeah.
available for you. You don't need to ask for a cash out or at all. So it's very, very quick. And then obviously the hero benefit, I think, of the debit card, matched up with the loyalty program is
Yeah.
up to 7% off gas. And then we also get you a Gold Star membership at Costco as well. So Costco's a
Okay.
great retail, and that's another way that you can save.
Yeah, also a popular spot for gas if you don't mind waiting in the
Yeah.
line. So, okay, so that's gas. What about inflation, other expenses? I think one thing that's sort of been on, gas is very popular to talk about because the prices go up and down. But, we've been hearing from a lot of drivers who say when they go in to get their car repaired, right, or these other sort of miscellaneous expenses and even just personal expenses. I'm curious, right? Like we talked before about sort of how much drivers are earning. It's come down a bit over the past 2 months, but costs are going up. So are drivers expected to to make less going into the future? Or, what does Uber think about, I guess, that expense piece, right? Because you see a lot of businesses across the board raising prices to account for that. And Uber may be doing that, but if we don't use that per mile and per minute, it's sort of hard for drivers to know, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's no question that the driver revenue is healthy compared to where it has been historically, and prices have increased for an Uber ride, and that has been passed along and more to drivers, which is totally appropriate based on the environment. We are working on, because a driver is essentially small business owner, and there's
Yeah.
the revenue, and then there's a cost, and ultimately it's about the profit, your take home profit. So we do have partnerships now with repair shops, auto repair, spare tires, etc. And we will continue to work on making sure that those deals are better than ever. We wanted to focus our efforts on gas because that has been
Yeah.
the most alarming increase. But you
Okay.
should expect us to come back to you with
Got it.
more discount, with more merchants, especially as it relates to costs that are directly related to driving.
Got it. So, like you said, right, gas and these other inflationary expenses are sort of beyond Uber's control. You can do as much as you can. I mean, I guess one, the sort of final thing that I want to chat about on the expense side of things is the one expense that I guess Uber can control and related to a driver is the commission that they take on every ride. Uber launched this new statement that I actually like, where I don't think it's quite rolled out yet, but at the end of the week and the end of the month, you can sort of see very clearly how much Uber is now taking, out of all of your pay. So I think it's becoming more transparent. But if you ask individual drivers, this is another probably top question or top complaint really is that, they'll say, oh, Uber takes 40, 50, 60% of every single fare, because there are rides, right, where the commission is higher and some where it's lower. But I mean, I guess to you, like, what's a fair commission, right? This is, I mean, a lot of retailers don't like paying the 30% to Apple, right? Amazon and others. But I guess to you, like, what's a fair commission? What would you tell drivers who are complaining about the commission that Uber takes?
So I think one issue to note as it relates to our commission and booking fee, et cetera, is we're also responsible for insurance costs, and insurance
Yeah.
costs, unfortunately, are very, very high in the US due to a number of factors. And that's something that kind of it's consistent. It has unfortunately been increasing, even though the rate of incidents has been decreasing. The
Yeah.
cost per incident for a variety of reasons has been increasing. So it's not a strict pass-through in any way, shape, or form. But when I look at our economics, post-insurance, again, it's not a direct pass-through, et cetera. That's not how we price. We think that something in the 20% range is fair. It's less than the 30% that Apple charges, et cetera.
Yeah.
And we think that's a general number that is a fair number. What shows up as higher, but the major reason why it's higher to some extent is the cost of insurance that we have to bear as well. So I think that's something else the driver should keep in mind.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I mean, we work with a lot of fleet owners and we've got some great insurance partners. And frankly, this is like one of the biggest barriers to starting new fleets and starting new companies is the insurance. So I know it's expensive, but also I think most drivers, they probably aren't aware and also don't really care, right? It's sort of like I see the commission. And so it seems like the opportunity there is to sort of highlight some of those expenses, right? If Uber is taking a 35% commission, but 15% of that is actually insurance, like as a driver, it seems like it'd be in Uber's best interest to let me know. So I don't just think that, you're taking all that money for yourself, or even small stuff, right, like the credit card processing fee. I imagine that's probably 2-3% on every single fare, right? So of 20%, that's a decent little chunk there, right? So I think that seems like the opportunity there, I guess, in terms of commission.
I do think that there's a lot more that we can do in terms of transparency, communication. And I think the other factor that you point out, Harry, is like we do have a higher take on certain rides, but then we take a lower take on other rides, and generally we're optimizing for an average take. And basically sometimes price goes up and down in order for us to most efficiently match a collection of possible matches to basically get as much business into our system as possible. So in that way, having this variable take rate to some extent is in drivers' interest, and it's in our interest, because it essentially increases the business at the same average take rate. we just have to do better and in terms of that
Yeah.
communication.
Well, and insurance, like you mentioned, right? It's a big cost. You talked about, I know Uber has been doing a lot of features around things like dash cams, and I guess even tying into safety. The sort of final thing that I wanted to end this interview with was safety, because I think this is one thing, driver safety. Really, it's one of the big areas of concern for drivers that I don't know if a lot of folks at Uber corporate are really aware of. Just how big of a concern or an issue it is for drivers. I mean, you've done some driving and delivering, so that drivers have to go through background checks. They've got to get their vehicle inspected. There's all these requirements. They get rated after every single trip. But for passengers, there's really none of that, right? There's no ID verification. You don't even have to use a real name, right? Drivers don't like that when you pick someone up in a dark alley at 3 a.m. and they've got a fake name, some joke name, right? It can be seem a little sketch. Seems like a bit of a double standard. So, I know Uber is investing in some areas like dash cams, but I'm curious how you're thinking about driver safety and, what more Uber could do there.
Yeah, I think safety in general, it is a very, very, very significant area of focus for us and investment for us. And you're absolutely right, which is it goes both ways, right? You
Yeah.
want riders to feel safe. You absolutely want drivers to feel safe. They're on the road a lot. It's often
Well, I
late
think
night,
drivers
etc.
go through, you have to do a selfie check as a driver every once in a while. I think the safety on the driver's side is pretty extensive. I think the feeling for drivers is like, we go through all this, passengers don't have to do anything. I don't know, maybe a background check on every single rider who gets in your car is asking too much, but is it too much to ask some of them to verify an ID, to use a real name when they get into your car, or the rides must be under the account holder? Because it's sort of like the wild, wild west right now when it comes to, those things for passengers.
And I think all of those factors are factors that we're looking at. And I'll give you one example, which is if you're not using a credit card that's verified, or you're using, for example, a gift card, right? We will now actually force you to show ID because we want to make sure we know what that person is. So we are absolutely kind of looking at situations that have an increased probability of something happening, of being less safe for the driver. And we are systematically actioning those issues based on, actual reports that we get in terms of safety and incidents. So this is something that's super, super important for us. And the balance is, if you ask for background checks, et cetera, on riders, you're not going to have any riders. You're not going to have any business.
Sure.
So this is something that we are very focused on. And we're looking at actually what's happening and taking on the most potentially fraught circumstances. And we are raising the safety level and the requirements on those circumstances. This is super important for us. Like my goal is for Uber to be the safest transportation platform on earth for drivers and riders. Because ultimately, long term is the right thing to do, short term and medium term and every single day and night.
Yeah.
But long term is good for business. If you feel safer driving for Uber, you will tend to drive for us before you drive other platforms.
Yeah.
So it is the right thing to do. It's a big focus, but it will be great for business long term.
Very cool. Well, I think that's a good note to end on, unless you have anything else you really must get off your chest. I really appreciate the time and coming on.
No, thank you for staying on us, and you should feel free to criticize because that's how we get better. Take care.
Take care.